It's the early 90s, and funny man Phil Hartman has the world on a string. He's got this fantastic career, beautiful family, and this wonderful house in Los Angeles.
Please welcome Phil Hartman. Mr. Phil Hartman, ladies and gentlemen.
When he's not working with his family, he can be found on the late-night talk show circuit.
Please welcome one of TV's funniest stars, Phil Hartman. Phil!
Phil was a guy that whenever he was available to do the show, we would take him.
Phil was on Letterman 13 times, so that gives you an example of how highly thought of he was.
He was a go-to guy, always come on prepared. Letterman always trusted him, and he knew the importance of getting to that punchline.
Do you want a light for your cigarette? I know I'm a non-smoker, Dave.
He's a very entertaining talk show guest.
I want to thank you and your wife for all your help.
The voices and the gags are perfect for late-night TV, but in there, you get little glimpses into the real guy. He talks about having a variety show.
Well, I'm going to do my own show for NBC, The Phil Show, which will be a sketch comedy show.
Phil brought in the young comedy writers Kevin and Brian Mulhern to develop the show.
It was just going to be a series of sketches, commercial parodies, not unlike what you would see on Saturday Night Live, but this one would be more Phil-centric.
Hi, Brian and Kevin. It's Phil Hartman calling. I'm back in New York after a shaky 2 weeks in LA, and I've just gone over your stuff, and it looks great. Congratulations, and we'll take it from here. Bye.
My wife, Bryn.
So remember, Bryn's been after Phil to get her some acting work. So Phil wants to actually create a part for his wife on his new show.
Bryn would seek his assistance in her career. He told me that she pestered him over and over. That was a stressor in their relationship.
The first time Phil brought up the prospect of bringing Bryn on as a cast member was a little bit awkward. My brother and I were both huge fans of Jan Hooks, and we thought that she would be perfect. And immediately, he shot it down. Phil said, my wife, I think, would be a perfect foil for me. At which point, my brother and I looked at each other and said, well, is she funny? He said, in her own way. And we thought, uh-oh. And the more that he talked about it, I could see that this was more about trying to work on the marriage and placate her, more so than maybe her being the most qualified person to do that job.
Phil also tried to develop a sitcom with a role for Bryn.
She had a very prominent role in it. I would have separate meetings with both of them, and they all loved what I was writing, and we had just hilarious times together.
But neither that sitcom nor the variety show ever made it to the pilot stage.
You're talking about going on to start your own variety show.
The Phil Show!
That's right.
It's not going to happen.
He called and said, you know what, I've decided I just want to be an actor. NBC has this show called News Radio, and it's a perfect role for me, and so I'm just going to do that. At a certain point, Bryn called, and she was really upset. I said, well, you know, maybe they'll work you into it. No, he's doing this because he doesn't want to work with me, that's why.
Just tell her I'm busy acting or something. Oh, good evening. I'm Phil Hartman from the NBC sitcom News Radio. Yes, exactly.
News Radio premiered in the springtime of 1995, and it starred Phil Hartman, Vicki Lewis, and Andy Dick. It was a quirky ensemble sitcom about the antics at a morning radio station.
It's time for
The Real Deal with Bill McNeil.
I'm your host, Bill McNeil.
Bill McNeil was basically an egomaniacal news radio personality.
His character was just so full of himself. He's completely the opposite of his character.
It was very difficult to hate the character because Phil was so lovable.
Jerry, how are we doing?
The fact that Jerry Seinfeld would do a thing on news radio, it gives you an idea of the degree to which Phil Hartman was regarded.
Come on, Jerry, you know me.
No, I don't.
He was happy that he wasn't carrying the show. I think he loved it.
What an interesting thing.
I would say Bryn confided in me quite a bit. I know she was upset with Phil on one, maybe two occasions where he would be doing a part, The Simpsons or News Radio. He had mentioned to Bryn that, you know, maybe I can get you a part. And when he'd come home, she'd say, well, did you talk to him about, getting me a part? And he'd say, oh, I forgot. And she'd be upset about that.
And her substance abuse issues really had not gone away.
She would stop, and there'd be a period of peace, and then she would indulge.
On Mother's Day in 1997, Bryn apparently went out and was in very bad shape when she came home the next morning. And Phil was furious. He told his mother a little bit later, I cannot live with someone who can't control drugs and alcohol. He insisted that Bryn go to rehab. And so Bryn ultimately agreed and said, okay, I'll go.
But months later, she would relapse again.
I was partying hard, and I'm not ashamed, and I never hid this. So I'm at a Christmas party at Phil's house. I'm with Bryn and one of her friends, and they both say, Andy, do you have any Coke? And I went, yeah, I do. Can we have some? Sure, here. I gave him a little bump. She was already in relapse mode, which I didn't even know she had a problem at all in the first place. Didn't know.
She took cocaine and probably took too much of it, and it scared her, and it scared Phil. Phil had a very strong opinion that he didn't want to be married to someone that's addicted to cocaine. He basically told her he's going to have a zero-tolerance policy towards cocaine usage.
So Bryn goes back to rehab, but she doesn't stay for long.
5-6 days she left, and she missed the kids, wanted to be with the kids, and she had the relapse, and she felt terribly remorseful about it.
I started to see a weight and more of the signs of the wear and tear of that on him. On one occasion, I recall him coming in looking very unkempt, which was out of character for him. He hadn't shaved, and there were some marks on his face, like a scrape.
I remember saying to him, she doesn't have a gun, does she? And he said, oh yeah, she has a gun. She has a gun for protection. And I said, protection against what? You live in Encino.
What went through my mind was the irony that here you are buying guns because you're afraid of home invasion. And in fact, the enemy has been in your house, indeed in your bed, all along.
By the late 90s, Phil is officially SNL royalty, and they have paid him the highest compliment, inviting him back to host the show twice. When he's not on TV, he's on the big screen.
It's not all the same to me, Bilko.
Co-starring with the likes of Steve Martin.
It's not what you think it is.
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
You can't bench press your way out of this one.
I've got a metal plate in my head.
And Michael J. Fox.
You do? No!
But Bryn's career, not so much. It pales in comparison. She's only getting some minor acting work.
She appeared in the movie North that was directed by Rob Reiner, and she plays a waitress.
One Coca-Cola, right here, and one Sex on the Beach.
She had done a few bit parts, like Third Rock to the Sun.
Let's go, gentlemen.
We watched it together, and she thought it was pretty funny. It was like a nice little boost for her.
But Phil tells a friend that he doesn't think Bryn is cut out to be an actress.
He was saying that she wasn't acting material.
She felt like he was losing interest, but not in the way where he's interested in other women.
Hi, Phil. How was your ski trip today?
She talked about him ignoring her.
Are you gonna stay home tonight?
I'll probably go to the office for a short time.
Okay.
Phil hated confrontation, so he would do a few things to avoid it. Maybe he'd smoke a joint, get high.
No encounter inside.
Maybe he'd take his plane to Catalina Island for a few days.
Phil wanted his downtime, his Phil time. I would say Phil was definitely a guy's guy.
He liked going places where there weren't a lot of people. That's why we went to Catalina.
Yeah, I wrote up this thing once and it's just murderous.
That was his escape. I remember him telling me, I took Bryn over to Catalina, but the weather was really bad and she got sick. I think that was intentional. I think he didn't want her to embrace the boat. That's how he could get away from Bryn.
My main avocation is in the area of
nature worship. It's almost a religion to me.
Bryn did say that Phil was distant sometimes, and sometimes actually he would go to his hangar, just wax the airplane and just to kind of get away.
She felt like Phil wasn't giving her very much attention, and he was sailing all the time, and he didn't want to spend time with her.
Action. Somebody told me that Bryn, Phil's wife, had us being followed by somebody, a private investigator, with a camera for a number of years.
Have there been many murders in this area?
Not that we admit to.
Either she thought that we were gay, and/or she thought that he was having an affair. He wasn't hiding anything, so he'd tell her. Going back to Catalina, somebody out there had thousands of photographs of us.
What, that outcropping right there?
Right there. Smoking dope, inflating the boat. He didn't have anything of great interest because Phil never had girls on the boat. He was adamant about not having women on the boat. He was a faithful guy, and I respected that in him.
Phil and I had reestablished our friendship, and Phil had to go to really extreme lengths to have any contact with me. Bryn was so jealous, and so crazy jealous, that a couple of times he came to my apartment in Santa Monica, and I'd make lunch and we'd just sit and talk and hang out because he wanted to be my friend and he couldn't be my friend in public. And he said, you know, I have to kind of sneak in. He'd wear a hat and glasses and he'd park in Slide Street and he'd sneak into my apartment because he said if photographs ever taken with us, I mean, that's it.
Bryn had low self-esteem. She worried about looking older, getting older. The month before they died, Bryn turned 40. So for many women, a 40th birthday is a big line in the sand and an emotional event.
She was always aware of, I need to look perfect, I need to be perfect, I need to be perfect in this situation. The one thing that I did know was that she had been given some Zoloft to take from Sean's doctor.
Zoloft is an antidepressant which came on the market in the early 1990s.
She talked about having anxiety at times.
When Bryn talked about the Zoloft, she didn't really go into detail about why, and I didn't think to ask, like, are you sad? You know, are you okay? I mean, I kind of just thought it was, okay, she's going on Zoloft, you know? It's what people do in Hollywood.
He told me that Bryn had been on cocaine and Zoloft and alcohol, and she's just been crazy lately, and that she wanted to fight every night before they went to sleep.
I know some reports said friends say they were fighting more the last 6 months. I find that to be totally untrue. I know I've talked to both of them and that wasn't the case. I know they had seen a counselor and both of them said that really helped, and they're trying to improve for their spouse. I mean, they cared that much about each other.
Phil mentioned more than once that it became physical. He said that Bryn would lose control and physically attack him, and he would have to hold her arms down and restrain her.
He said, yeah, our fights are getting much worse and we keep going in and out of therapy. He said, and she gets vicious, she gets violent. And I said, violent? And he said, yeah, she throws things at me, she slaps me. I said, honey, she doesn't have a gun, does she? And he said, oh yeah, she has a gun for protection. And I said, protection against what? You live in Encino.
Bryn and Phil both told me they'd taking like self-protection classes and shooting classes, and they bought firearms, and you know, they had them both in safes, and it was for protections against a stalker, intruder.
I've had some difficulties, you know. I've had an extortion attempt on me. I've been a target just because I'm famous. I don't want to invite the attention of unbalanced individuals.
In early May 1998, Phil Hartman sat for his very last press junket to talk about his upcoming movie, Small Soldiers.
I'm here to negotiate the surrender.
Small Soldiers is a splashy summer popcorn movie with razzle-dazzle special effects.
You'd have to be crazy not to be scared.
Oh man, I get drugged and kidnapped and shot at with a bazooka and beat up and flamethrowed, and it's pretty astounding.
But what no one can see coming, least of all Phil, is that he won't live to see the movie open.
I think Bren was insecure and impulsive, and of course, drugs make you more impulsive. That's a very scary combination that can lead to terrible things happening.
The person who shot him still around her?
Yeah, he was great.
You don't think anything dramatic is going to happen. Phil Hartman and Bryn Hartman are not Sid and Nancy. This is not destined to end in flames and gunfire. They are a nice, prosperous suburban couple. There's always stuff going on underneath. Of course, everybody has secrets and stories and personal and private lives, but no one thinks this is going to happen. No.
Phil and I were driving down to Newport Beach on the way back, and he dropped me off, and it was just, I didn't know it was the last time I was going to see him.
He came home. I was waiting for him to come home because that was going to be the time for me to go. And Bryn had just gone out, and she wasn't going to be back till late, so Phil was going to take over in taking care of the children.
On the last night of Phil's life, he gave me a call to let me know that he thought things were going great and to keep at it. I expressed some career issues I was having at the time, and he said to me, "Don't worry about that stuff. You're a talented guy. It's all going to work out." He said, "The most important thing in your life is your family, your friends."
2 days before I called him, and I was driving, I remember this very clearly. I called to kind of take his temperature. The question was, "So how are things with you and Bryn?" "Great, really great. She's listening to me. Things are quiet." And it also demonstrated his illusion that he was in control. That was important to him. Phil was always in control. When we went on a boat ride, took the boat over to Catalina, he was the captain and gave orders.
Bryn goes out for drinks around 7 or 7:30 with Christine Zander, who we will later know as a writer on shows like Third Rock from the Sun. They go to Buco de Beppo, which is just 1,000 feet from their home. Bryn has 2 cosmopolitans.
There was nothing abnormal about Bryn at all that day. It was just a normal evening.
Bryn and Christine start talking about Bryn's relationship with Phil, and she's not happy with it. Bryn just doesn't feel valued at home. She says Phil wants somebody to take care of the kids, but he doesn't care enough about my own wants and needs. He doesn't care enough about my career aspirations.
Christine does go to the bathroom once or twice, and when she comes back, she believes that she sees Bryn twice on a payphone in what I believe she describes as a somewhat agitated state. And it's also clear to Christine later that Bryn wants to keep the night going. Christine would prefer not to. So they part.
Bryn tells the bartender at Buca de Beppo, "I'll come back and I'll bring Phil next time." So she's literally identifying herself as this person that's married to a famous person. "I'll bring the important part of me back to dinner next time I come."
Bryn wants to keep the night going. How will she do that? She goes to the home of a longtime friend, Ron Douglas.
Bryn shows up at Ron's house at about 10:15. She's driving her Jeep Cherokee. She has a few beers and, according to Ron, seems kind of starved for attention.
He feels that she's hopped up and doesn't want to go back home and is a little glum about her relationship with Phil. And so as she keeps drinking, he describes an evening where he's trying to entertain her.
Douglas and Bryn go back a long time, about 15 years, and indeed they had been lovers, but that has since ended. While she's at Ron's house, Bryn complains about Phil. She says he's spending all of his time with his friend Britt.
I think for Bryn, it was more she would have preferred to have steered him towards his celebrity friends. I'm just a friend that is not in the business.
Ron Douglas said to the police that she left his house at about 12:45 that morning.
When she gets back to the Hartman home, the kids have been put to bed, and what happens afterwards, we don't really know. The only information we have that there was even an argument seems to have come from Sean, the boy, remembering a slammed door and somebody yelling, "Sorry, sorry, sorry, sorry." That's all we have.
Phil hated conflict, and he hated the fact that his third marriage was not going well. He didn't want to be a three-time loser when it came to marriage.
At some point in the early morning hours of May 28, 1998, Bryn Hartman gets her hand on a Smith & Wesson gun. Phil is lying with his legs crossed on the bed. Bryn gets next to him on the bed and fires 3 shots into him and kills him.
Phil told me repeatedly that when they had fights, he would go to bed, go to sleep. And so it doesn't take a lot of thought to realize that she probably came home high, they had a fight, he went to sleep, and he never woke up.
So it's 3:45 in the morning, and Ron Douglas is awakened by the pounding on his front door. He goes downstairs, and it's Bryn, and she's in her pajamas and appears to be drunk.
Ron has had quite enough of Bryn Hartman for the evening, but that does not dissuade Bryn Hartman.
She walks inside and she says, "Don't yell at me. Phil yells at me all the time."
And she tells Ron Douglas, "I killed Phil. I don't know why." He hears these words and doesn't believe them literally. It doesn't sound real.
So Bryn is looking for something in her purse, and a gun falls out. Douglas immediately picks it up and takes possession of the weapon.
Ron Douglas takes the gun and puts it in his trunk, and they drive in separate cars back to the Hartman home. They go inside, and Ron Douglas sees that Phil Hartman is dead, and he calls 911.
I think there's been a shooting here.
Little does Ron Douglas know, Phil isn't the only person who will die there that morning.
So it's around 6 a.m. and Ron Douglas finds himself in the most bizarre circumstance. He's in the Hartman home, and Bryn is now leading him into the master bedroom to see if, in fact, she has killed Phil.
They go inside, and Ron Douglas sees that Phil Hartman is dead.
So Bryn tells Douglas, "I killed him, I killed him. I told you I did it, I told you I did it. I killed him, I don't know why."
And that will always be the question. What scenario can you create in which Bryn Hartman's life is improved for the better by the murder of Phil Hartman?
Douglas steps into the hallway to call 911.
I think there's been a shooting here. Okay, do you see a victim? Yes.
Bryn, meanwhile, stays in the bedroom and is speaking to someone else on a different phone. The bedroom door closes. Ron goes to open it, but he finds out that it's locked.
The wife shot him and you're both there.
Was this on purpose, or is this an accident, or what? Yes.
Do you know what happened?
I have no idea. She came from that house and she was drunk. She said she had killed her husband. I didn't believe her.
Where's the weapon now?
It's in my hand.
Okay.
Because she brought it to my house.
What is your name, sir?
My name is Ron Douglas.
Bryn is screaming and crying.
She's calling a lot of people.
My husband answered the phone, and I heard him talking, and he came in and was like, white as a ghost. And I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Well, Bryn just called. She's hysterical. I can barely understand it. She thinks Phil is dead. She needs you." We threw some clothes on and we ran over there. And just then I could hear, coming from the direction of their bedroom, the most pitiful, agonizing screams I've ever heard in my life.
The last 12 hours of Phil and Bryn Hartman's life are almost so hard to comprehend that you forget that there were 2 small children in the house when the police arrived.
Ron has grabbed Sean and gotten him into the hands of the LAPD.
As the officers got there, they immediately saw Mr. Douglas and the older son at the doorway, and they removed them from the location.
Ron also gives the gun to the LAPD. Bryn is locked inside her bedroom with Phil. Ron then also tells the LAPD that there is a girl, Bergen, who is inside the house.
She was found in one of the bedrooms toward the back of the house, and the officer told me that when he found her, she was cowering with fright in the corner with a blanket over her.
It seems that by the time she is back in that bedroom with another gun, she cannot see a way out. And she calls her sister and tells her sister always to remind her children that she loved them.
To make arrangements for your children's care when you know you're going to be dead in a few minutes is actually the actions of a rational person. The enormity of what she'd done probably was fading in and out of her head throughout that night. But I think in that moment, it all became very, very clear.
And then she puts the gun to her lips and she pulls the trigger.
Officers were actually in the house removing the Hartman children when they heard a shot.
One officer heard a gunshot, and it came from the north end of the house. I'm assuming we got an active shooter inside. Garage doors looked like this, they were closed. I remember on my way out, there was a red Ferrari parked in that garage. Walked down past to this entrance over here. Had two officers go outside. I wanted them to set a diversion.
And the next thing I know, all of these policemen are running up to the house.
I told them to gather up rocks. And upon my command, I want you to break those windows and keep throwing the rocks through the windows until we make entry. When we got to the last place where she could be, which was the master bedroom, we called to her and asked her to surrender and come out with her hands up.
And this is the moment when the cops realize they're facing off against absolutely no one.
When we go through the door, we find a man laying on the bed. He has a bullet hole through his forehead. There's a woman laying next to him, and she also has a gunshot wound. Looking at the bodies, it's obvious that they were not alive.
Got in the car and drove straight to the house. I did the normal thing. I jumped out of the car and panicked. Was like, where are the children? Where are the kids? Where's Bergen and Sean? Tell me where they are.
The bodies of Phil Hartman and his wife had now been loaded into a coroner's van and removed from the home.
For me, it is one of the most tragic things. He had actually experienced the American dream that most people don't get to experience. And to have that taken away in this fashion seems so contradictory and so out of place and so unfair.
The children, a 9-year-old boy and 6-year-old girl, have been taken into protective custody.
When I went down to the police station, Bergen and Sean were there, and I said, can I take the kids out somewhere? Out of this environment, it was craziness there. They said, there's a park across the street, take them into the park. And I remember I was pushing Sean on a swing. And I said, Sean, is there anything I could do for you? And he said, no. He said, my mom promised me she'd take me to a lot of fun places, and now she'll never be able to. Bergen looked like she was more in shock than anything else. And I remember her saying, I know I'll never see my mommy and daddy again. I don't know how she knew it, but it was one of the worst days of my life, seeing those kids.
After I heard Bryn had shot Phil, and then heard Bryn had shot herself, I think everyone was in shock in the family, and cannot imagine why she would do that.
So selfish. thought she could take him away from everybody. I just stopped.
How could she? It's a question everybody has, including Bryn's family. 1 year later, the family thinks they might have the answer.
They looked like a happy couple, but today this peaceful family portrait is shattered. Actor-comedian Phil Hartman and his wife are found dead in their Encino home.
Saw it on the news, and then I went, what?
The coroner has now arrived here in Encino, joining police in their investigation into the death of comedian Phil Hartman and his wife.
This has got to be some publicity stunt. You know, leave it to Phil to, like, turn the tables on everybody, you know? It was just all real.
In Los Angeles today, the actor and comedian Phil Hartman was shot to death in his own home, apparently by his wife, who then killed herself.
It was like Bryn shot Phil, then she shot herself. And what? What?
It was so shocking that you couldn't even understand it. You couldn't even know enough and be sad enough to cry in that moment.
Focus now is on his marriage with 40-year-old Bryn Hartman.
They weren't together a lot. I mean, I usually see either him come and go or her come and go. They were rarely together.
I've lost a sister that was such a wonderful person, and a brother-in-law who was wonderful, and it was very hard. It was like getting punched in the gut, because I knew my sister would never murder anyone. It was such a hard thing to face.
The frustrating thing about this is that the question lingers in the air, why? There's nothing to fully explain or to put your finger on as to why Phil Hartman, even if his marriage was not the most successful, died in such a tragic, horrible, violent way at the hands of his wife.
A toxicology report, which should reveal whether Mrs. Hartman was under the influence of drugs or alcohol at the time of the shooting, should be completed late next week.
In the absence of any real solid information, it leads some people in the Hollywood community to start pointing fingers. The blame game is on, and one of the people who has a bullseye on his back is Andy Dick, who once gave Bryn cocaine at a party.
I think John Lovitz blamed Andy in a lot of ways for Bryn's relapse. John loved Phil, and I know he was angry, and he probably wanted somebody to blame, in a sense. You know, I was driving, Andy never had a car because Andy always was on probation.
Vicki and I are driving out of the parking lot, and John Lovitz stopped us and leaned in and whispered in my ear, "I know you killed Phil Hartman." I was like, what the hell are you talking about?
And they just started to go at each other. You know, John was blaming Andy, and Andy was fighting back.
You gave Bryn cocaine that made her go crazy and shoot Phil. I'm like, no. I didn't cause her to relapse, and I didn't give her cocaine, and then she ran off, got a gun, and shot her husband and herself. No, that happened 6 months later.
So ABC News reached out to John Lovitz, and he had no comment.
Mrs. Hartman had a blood alcohol level of 0.12, as well as evidence of the prescription drug Zoloft, which is an antidepressant, and also showed evidence of cocaine usage.
When the tragedy happened, there were so many different stories that were so far off base. I just wanted the truth to be told, that there was a drug involved that was prescribed to her that contributed greatly to both their deaths.
On the anniversary of the murder-suicide, Bryn Hartman's brother is suing the maker of the antidepressant she was taking.
I did file a lawsuit against Pfizer alleging that the use of Zoloft caused my sister not to know what she was doing, and she shot her husband. And when she came out of that, she shot herself.
Bryn Hartman was suffering ill effects from the drug, according to the lawsuit, telling friends she felt like she was going to jump out of her skin. The suit says the doctor told her simply to cut the dosage by half.
To disavow or say, well, gee, the cocaine had nothing to do with it, or the alcohol, of course they had something to do with it. The question under the law is, was the Zoloft a substantial contributing factor. I believe that it was.
At the time the lawsuit was filed in 1999, Pfizer said there was no medical or scientific evidence that Zoloft caused violent or suicidal behavior.
We did reach a settlement.
Pfizer settled the case for $100,000, and there was no admission of any wrongdoing.
But it's just a TV show. None of us really died. Right, gang? Right.
Eerily, that was Phil's last line on news radio. The next season started with the death of Phil's character, Bill McNeil, who had written letters to everyone in the event of his passing.
Distributed to the appropriate parties.
It was happening while the camera was on us and as we were actually having to read these things out loud.
Dear Beth, I am sorry about that time I said that your outfit looked like something you fished out of the garbage can after the circus left town.
It was genuine. I don't think there was any acting going on, which is why it was so touching.
Hi, I'm Troy McClure. You may remember me from such nature films as Earwigs, Ooh.
We love Phil, and we thought that there would be nobody else that could do his characters.
Lionel Hutz, attorney at law.
Because it was Phil, and he was so identified with those characters, and he made them his own, and to have another actor's voice come out of those characters just felt wrong to us.
They were retired after he passed. We never had Troy McClure or Lionel Hutz doing the line on the show.
I think about his kids all the time. I probably think about his kids once a week and wonder how they're doing.
Phil wanted his ashes scattered in Emerald Bay off the coast of Catalina Island, which was his favorite place on Earth. And that's where he wanted to spend the rest of his days.
You know, the word genius gets tossed around a lot in our business, like way too much. But Phil Hartman was a total comic genius.
I think had Phil lived, he could have been a Tom Hanks kind of guy. He had everything it took to be a big star.
The Hollywood Walk of Fame ceremony was special because I felt like it brought Phil back to life, and then to see SNL castmates, it was good for my soul, and I think it was good for the soul of just about everybody there. He finally got his just due.
Not only are we missing out, but he is. And I know there's never gonna be anybody that can fill his shoes.
Simon says hands on your ears. Simon says hands on your mouth.
Well, I want Bergen and Sean to know that they were a very happy, loving family, that both Bryn and Phil loved them so much, and they both took so much time to make their lives a joy.
This film is in elephanto vision.
Bryn was a sweet, sweet, awesome mother, and she was a beautiful soul.
Give Dad that kiss.
Give Dad that kiss, too.
Hi, littles. How you doing?
And watching some of these old videos, both the kids were moved by all the love that was shown. As far as raising the children, it was up to my sister, Kathy, and her husband, the guardians, and they chose to raise them in the Midwest.
How you doing? Come close to the camera.
So thankfully they grew up as loved children.
The kids now are all grown up. Sean is 31 and Bergen is 27.
Happy birthday to you.
Bergen's doing great.
Bergen, this is so gigantic.
She's married now, and her and her husband have started a business that's doing real well.
Hey, Bergie, what do you want to say to yourself 10 years from now?
She's a beautiful gal and has a handsome husband, and she's living a normal, happy life.
Son,
Yeah?
you want to wish your sister happy birthday on the tape?
Nope.
Come on.
Happy birthday, Bergen.
Sean's doing well. He got a degree in art, and he's pursuing his dream of being an artist and musician.
Hi.
I believe Bryn and Phil would be very proud of how Sean and Bergen have grown up and the people they've turned into.
Bergen and Sean like their privacy and want to remain out of the spotlight. But on a Father's Day a couple of years ago, Bergen posted on Instagram and wrote, "This dapper dude will always have my heart. I miss him dearly."